In this lesson, we're going to return to the idea of understanding and describing personal, social, and economic impacts. And we're now going to apply them to the scenario that we've been considering over the last couple of videos, which is Benjamin Heads. So this is writing impacts in an applied or assignment-like situation, as opposed to just in isolation. So impacts. What do we know about impacts? Well, the first thing we need to know is our impacts are actually going to concern this particular user that we developed called Geraldine Jones, who lives in Benjamin Heads, which is our community that has public transportation issues. And we're trying to come up with some type of digital solution to solve those issues. So based on our developed user persona, we're able to determine some potential impacts, also known as benefits, that the user might get out of using a digital solution in relation to the specific problem that we are addressing. Now remember, impacts can be personal, social, or economic. So let's just revise those definitions quickly. Personal impacts change the way that a person does something or alters their own opinions or knowledge. Whereas social impacts alter the well-being of the surrounding or wider community. Social and personal impacts kind of fit into this same domain, and they can include effects on health, equality, living standards, cohesion, resilience, security, and safety practices, and they're often non-monetary and include economic, sometimes, or environmental elements. Economic impacts, on the other hand, affect an economic system at a local, national, or global level, and they include changes in revenue, operating costs, profitability, gross domestic product, employment, or investment returns. So our user can experience impacts across some or all of these three domains. So we're just going to come up with some impacts now that Geraldine Jones, our user, could experience if the public transportation system in Benjamin Heads was improved. So personally, we noticed that she had a lot of stress and anxiety. This came out of her user journey that we developed. She was always worried about when the bus was going to arrive. So personally, she may reduce her stress and anxiety. Socially, she might get a better reputation amongst her work colleagues. So you could almost think of this one as a personal or a social. Sometimes the definition of personal social is not always going to be really clean cut. Sometimes they can fit into multiple categories. And socially, she may be able to spend some extra time with her friends. That could also be considered personal, so it just depends on the perspective that you want to put on this. Economically, if she gets a better enhanced reputation at work because she's now always on time and not so stressed and anxious, she might somehow perform better and get an increase in pay, which could lead to her ultimate goal of having enough money to buy a vehicle. So these are some potential impacts or benefits that Geraldine could get from fixing public transport in Benjamin Heads. Now just remember, impacts don't always have to be positive. They could be negative consequences, but we're trying to find things to improve our user's life. So negative consequences could be an unforeseen side effect. So now we're able to take these impacts and we're able to consider each of them as a SMART goal using the SMART goal structure. So the SMART goal structure said that things were specific, and when we talked about specificity, we're asking who's receiving the benefit and what is the benefit they're receiving. Then we asked the question, how will we know this benefit's been felt? What were the indicators of this? That was the measurable characteristic. We asked, is it achievable? Is it relevant to the problem? And then the time basement, how long until the project benefit will actually be felt? So we're just going to go through and we're just going to consider one of these situations for Geraldine. We're just going to consider her reduction in anxiety and stress levels associated with not knowing when the bus service or the taxi service will arrive. And we're just going to go through the SMART goal, S-M-A-R-T, and answer each of the questions. And once we've answered each of the questions, we'll take those answers and we will combine them to say something like you might say in an assignment. So let's write something specific. Geraldine Jones will have significantly less stress and anxiety related to her use of public transportation in Benjamin Heads. She will have timely information about the status of the system available through the application. So this is who is receiving the benefit and what benefit they are receiving. That's how we make it specific. How could we potentially measure this? Well, there's lots of ways, but we could say that the success of this benefit can be determined by the convenience and ease with which Geraldine can access information related to the arrival of buses or taxis to pick her up. So that could be a little bit vague. So we could actually even consider this from another aspect. We could say something like run a user survey and determine her levels of satisfaction at the start of the introduction of the system before she used it, and then a couple of months after, and see if there was an improvement in her attitude and faith in the public transportation system. So that's just another way you could measure it if you wanted. Would this be achievable? So the measurable thing here is that we can determine the convenience and ease which she can access information. Can we achieve this? And I believe that we probably could. Is it relevant? Yes, it is. It's directly tied to the goal of increasing the convenience of public transport in Benjamin Heads. And that relevant, what we're comparing then to is the scope statement that we wrote for our problem. What is the core goal that we have for our application? And here, it was to improve the convenience and coordination of public transport in this area. And for us, we always said time-based was always going to be by the conclusion of the project, because we have short-term projects. Okay, now that we've gone through and we've got things that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based, we can actually combine these together to write some type of paragraph. So let's put it all together. The first thing is, Geraldine Jones will obtain a direct personal development benefit from the developed application. So we've been specific. She will experience significantly less stress and anxiety when interacting with the system, as she'll have timely information telling her when the buses and taxis will arrive. This is specific. What? The ease with which she obtains the information that's currently available will be a key measure of the initial success of the application. So that's how we can measure it. We can also do longer term surveys to measure her user satisfaction. Once again, this is measurable and quantitative. We could actually get a value or a number. And that's pretty much as far as we can go for now. The achievable and relevant and time-based, they don't really fit into this unless we came up with something that was not really achievable. And then we could potentially later on in our documentation refer to that as something that would be a recommendation for future development. But what we have here is sufficient. And what we would do is we would just store this in our assignment work. And when we get to the end of our assignment, we would take this impact and we would evaluate the product we made to see if we have, in fact, achieved a level of success that could make this impact a reality. And that's where we'll get to in a little while from now.